Hey guys, welcome back. So this is the third video of our playlist Exceptions and Exception Handling. If you haven't watched the previous videos, I would recommend you to go and watch them first. Why? Because they explain the core of the concept. Like what are exceptions, what is exception handling, how do we handle exceptions, so why do we need to handle exceptions, various constraints revolving around exception handling, what are the types of exceptions, and so on. So watching those videos first would help you understand the concept better. Okay, so let's start with this one. So in this video, we'll discuss about the key points that must be kept in mind when we are applying exception handling to overridden methods. So this video explains how is exception handling related to method overriding. So this is going to be a very interesting video. So let's start. Firstly, let's talk about unchecked exceptions. Unchecked exceptions don't have any constraints for overridden methods. That is, they can be declared in the overridden subclass methods irrespective of the type of exception declared in the corresponding superclass method. What does that mean? That means no matter which type of exception has been declared in the superclass method, the subclass method can declare unchecked exception. Even if the superclass method does not declare any exception at all, still the subclass method can declare unchecked exception. Here I have two classes, class parent, which declares a method named as dummy method, and a class child that extends the parent class and overrides the dummy method that has been declared in the parent class. Okay, so as we see, these are just empty methods which don't have any implementation, and also they do not declare any exception. So the dummy method in the parent class does not declare any exception, and if we declare an unchecked exception in the dummy method of the child class, that should work fine and the compiler should be happy about it. Let's quickly try. Here I'll add a throws clause and add an unchecked exception. So for this illustration, let's take null pointer exception. Here I'll just add null pointer exception in the throws clause, and as we see, the compiler is okay with it and the program has been compiled successfully. Now even if I add any other exception in the parent class as well, this should work fine because unchecked exceptions don't have any constraints for overridden methods. Let's quickly see this, and let's add array index out of one exception. Okay, so here I've added two different types of unchecked exceptions in the dummy method of the parent class and the child class, and the compiler doesn't have any problem with it and it's compiling fine. So for unchecked exceptions, there was no rule actually, and thus it was quite easy. Now let's come on to checked exceptions where there are constraints. So here is an easy to understand table which I've made for you guys. Okay, so there are two rules basically. I'll explain both these rules. Let's start with rule 1. So when the superclass method does not declare a checked exception, oh, a typo here, I've written mover, sorry. Okay, so when a superclass method does not declare a checked exception, then the overriding subclass method could also not declare a checked exception. It can only declare an unchecked exception because obviously there are no rules for unchecked exceptions, so that is fine. But it cannot declare a checked exception in that case. Let's quickly see. So here in the dummy method of the parent class, let me remove the unchecked exception which we declared earlier, and also the unchecked exception that we declared in the child class. So now the dummy method of the parent class does not declare any exception, and if I try to declare a checked exception in the dummy method of the child class, it should throw us a compiler error. Let's quickly try that out. Let me declare a file not found exception here, which we know is a checked exception. So as soon as I declare a file not found exception in the dummy method of the child class, the compiler gave us an error. Let's see what is the error here. Exception file not found exception is not compatible with the throws clause in parent.dummy method. So it says that you have not declared any checked exception in the dummy method of the parent class, thus we cannot have any checked exception in the dummy method of the child class. Okay, so this was rule 1, pretty straightforward, pretty clear. Now let's come on to rule 2. Let me remove this exception which is giving us an ugly error. Okay, so rule 2 states that whenever we have a superclass method which declares a checked exception, then the overriding subclass method obviously can also declare a checked exception, but it should either be the same exception or subclass exception, or if we want, we can not declare any exception at all in the overriding subclass method. So the constraint here is that if a superclass method throws a checked exception, you cannot declare a superclass exception in the overriding subclass method. I know it sounds a bit confusing, but let's quickly try it. So in the dummy method of the parent class, I'm now declaring a checked exception. Here I'll be declaring an IO exception, which we know is a checked exception. The compiler is okay. It does not throw us any error and the program compiles fine. This demonstrates that if the superclass method declares a checked exception and the subclass method does not declare any exception at all, we are fine. Now let's throw the same exception that has been declared in the superclass method in the overriding subclass method as well, and see if the compiler is okay. Here as well, the compiler is fine. We can obviously declare the same exception that has been declared in the superclass method in the overriding subclass method as well. Now let's try to declare a subclass exception in the overriding subclass method. So we know that file not found exception is a subclass of the IO exception. So here I'll replace the IO exception in the subclass method with file not found exception and see if the compiler is working fine. And just a disclaimer that it should work fine. Okay, so here I've replaced the IO exception with the file not found exception in the overriding subclass method, and the compiler is okay. The program compiled successfully. So we can either have same or subclass exception or no exception at all in the overriding subclass method. We have demonstrated all these three cases. But now let's come on to the constraint. Let me declare a superclass exception in the overriding subclass method. So we know that exception class is the superclass of all exceptions. So let me replace the file not found exception with the exception class. And let's see if it throws an error. Okay, so as expected, the compiler gives us an error. And again, it would say that exception is not compatible with throws clause in parent.dummy method. So you cannot declare a superclass exception in the overriding subclass method. So this was pretty much it about this video. I'll meet you in the next one where we'll dig deeper into exceptions and exception handling. Till then, goodbye, have a nice day.